In this video, we're talking about sick building syndrome causes and sick syndrome building treatment. We're going to talk about what sick building syndrome is, including the symptoms. The question to be asking yourself is, are you living or working in a building suffering from sick building syndrome? You know, we spend about 80 to 90% of our time indoors. And if we're spending that much time indoors and it's in a sick building, well, what's it doing to us? Health Explorer Neil Fellows here to get healthy and fit and stay healthy and fit and do it in a way that's natural and unique to you. Please subscribe and hit the bell. Today we're having a conversation about sick building syndrome causes and sick building syndrome treatment. I want to know if sick building syndrome is even a thing, and if it is, well, how much of a thing is it? So let's find out about sick building syndrome. Let's see if it really exists. Joining me is alternative life coach and house healer, Tim Walter. Tim, let's just dive straight in with $1 million question. Does sick building syndrome really exist?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's as far as I'm concerned, it absolutely exists. Sick building syndrome, sometimes abbreviated to SBS, but the problem is that the mainstream medical profession overall, if we say, well, overall, we sort of say USA or the UK, the medical professions, do they accept that sick building syndrome actually exists? And the answer is, well, kind of, because you can go onto the NHS website here in the UK, and yeah, sure enough, there's a whole bunch of stuff about sick building syndrome. You start to look around in some of the USA medical websites, and they are a bit more cautious. They say, well, yes, there appears to be a collection of symptoms, very vague symptoms, and we'll talk about those in a sec, that people are affected by in some buildings. But do they recognize it as a specific category of illness? Well, no, they don't, broadly speaking, in the USA. And I think part of that is actually because of the potential for legal action by employees over there. Because sick building syndrome actually does appear to apply. Well, the World Health Organization accepts it exists. In 1983, it actually came up with this phrase that some people find difficult to remember, sick building syndrome. They came up with that in 1983, and they reckoned then that actually about 30% of office type buildings, they didn't use that term, but it's like buildings in which employees are, spending their working time, actually seem to be affected by something that they labeled as sick building syndrome. So it exists. What does it mean for the individual? Well, this is where this vague collection of symptoms comes in, because it can mean all sorts of different things. It can mean that somebody feels, just generally tired, and they have a difficulty concentrating. That's quite a classic, of course, for a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But the NHS side, actually, I've got some notes here that I printed off earlier on. Symptoms, how to check if you have sick building syndrome: headaches, blocked or runny nose, dry, itchy skin, dry, sore eyes or throat, cough or wheezing. We won't mention COVID in relation to that. Rashes, tiredness and difficulty concentrating, which I've already said. So those are very broad sort of set of physical reactions. And the issue is that a lot of the medical profession actually say, well, these are psychosomatic. These are ill-defined. They're not classifiable in any specific cause. It's a psychological issue. Well, okay, but most of our life is a psychological issue. It's how we react to something. That's the point of a psychological issue. Yeah. So yeah, it exists basically, but it just depends how you label it.
Yeah, sure. You touched on some of the symptoms there. Are there more symptoms?
Well, the thing is that there are. Let me start that again. The thing is that there are all sorts of different issues that employees can, go to a doctor with, present with, along those sort of lines. I mean, I've actually, there was a really interesting example of this, because everybody's different. Everybody responds to a situation differently. And so sick building syndrome has become this big amorphous thing that people say, okay, well, let's put that into there. There's, you have these symptoms. They're not really like these other symptoms, but that fits. You're reacting to your workplace. Because the crucial thing is that people feel dreadful when they're in the place of work. When they leave it, they don't feel dreadful. That's the key thing. So the logic says, well, it must be something to do with the building. Now, there are all sorts of really grounded and, practical things that it could be. It could be the chemical, it could be a reaction to chemicals that are used for cleaning. It could be electromagnetic fields, perhaps. But there was actually an employee, somebody that my wife used to work with, one of her team, actually she was mildly epileptic. And she used to feel sometimes when she was in the office that she was getting the precursor symptoms to a fit. So she would obviously sort of get up and walk out, and then it would calm down again. Now, what they worked out was actually that she was reacting to, believe it or not, the color pattern on the wallpaper of the office. Because if she was facing this particular wall, she would start to feel, she was going to go. She was going to have a fit. And it turned out that she was, reacting to something to do with the blue spectrum in the color palette, and this wallpaper was clashing, but nobody else was affected by it. So it was absolutely just this one individual. Now, that you could put that into, sick building syndrome, but that's a psycho, reaction of that one individual to something that's in the environment. So, do we call that sick building syndrome? Well, it's to do with the building. I mean, the American medical profession have actually started to label it slightly differently, and they are now using the term building-related illness. But that is specifically like in that example where the lady was reacting to the wallpaper. So if they find a cause, then they will label it as building-related illness. They won't use the term sick building syndrome. That's purely a medical get out to say, well, it's related to the building, and this is what the cause we found. So let's put that in that box. And that's a box ticking exercise more than anything else.
Yeah. So what are some of the causes of sick building syndrome?
The problem is we don't really know, because if we actually knew, then they would just be sorted out, and building regs would be put in place to say, well, this cannot be done in X, Y, Z. I think that the issue is about, broadly speaking, it gets into, for me, it gets into this area of how do we address the humanity's role within a space in which it sits, right? So so how do I, as an individual, respond to this space in which I'm going to go to work? Now that's a job for an architect, fundamentally. But of course, the Health and Safety Executive here in the UK actually has various guidelines relating to sick building syndrome, and there's a whole PDF that you can download from their website about construction materials and all this sort of thing. But if we think about the role of the space as a container for the individual or the collection of people, then the question about what makes a space sacred and what makes a space very beneficial comes into play when you're designing an area that is for work. You see, one of the things about sick building syndrome, I may have mentioned this earlier, is that often it most often applies, or it most often crops up in open plan offices.
Right.
And so you ask yourself, well, why would that be? That's something about the design of open plan offices, even if that is because there are, maybe 100 people or more in an open plan space. Well, that's still about design, because if open plan is not good for the human being, then it you shouldn't put people into open plan offices, fundamentally. But there are practical real world, issues. People can be allergic to things. They can be allergic to, as I said before, chemicals and all sorts of things, or fluorescent lights. That was a classic for a long time. And some people still react to these modern LED lights because they're kind of just very, very gently flickering. And that can cause issues as well, you know. So there's all sorts of things. But my work, and the reason that I suppose we're talking about sick building syndrome is that there are also, you've got the very practical things that people can be affected by, but there are all sorts of subtle influences as well. Now, subtle influences, science uses the term subtle energies, but these can be the things that our subconscious is picking up on that just don't get through to our conscious state of being, right? And that's a whole myriad of things. So I won't sit here for an hour and list what those could be for you.
Thank you. It's fascinating though, thinking about it, because you know, I have definitely been affected by lighting in certain buildings. I find it going into, say, like a hotel where you go to a conference or an event, the lighting in there I find very kind of suppressing. We used to have in our office, we actually for a while had one of our walls painted red in here, which obviously is a very lively color that can overstimulate you and actually leave you feeling burnt out. So we now have a very cool green in the office, so that it allows us to kind of breathe within very much the same sort of color as you have behind you.
Yeah, right. This green here.
Yeah, so we have very tranquil colors. So I'm talking with alternative life coach and house healer Tim Walter about sick building syndrome causes. And if you're finding this topic really helpful, please do give us a thumbs up, because it really does help the channel. Tim, how do we go about sick building syndrome treatment? What can we do about it?
Well, obviously, the first thing is that if you are experiencing any of the things that we've talked about, like fatigue, nausea, headaches, you know, or anything worse, like that lady we mentioned about the epilepsy, then the first thing to do is to actually just be very conscious and mindful of, does it only happen when you go into one particular space, right? So that's one thing. So, okay, so let's say yes, it does. It happens in the office. So then you want to be trying to evaluate, well, what is it about the office that actually seems to be a trigger? So if you ask yourself these questions before you then go off and see a GP, then at least the GP's got something to go on, or the medical practitioner, whoever you want to see, or they may be working in a company that's got a company nurse, that sort of thing. So, it really is a case of sort of self-diagnosis to that extent. And actually the NHS website here in the UK actually has a little section that says how to ease the symptoms yourself. So if I could just read a little bit about that, because that's, it's practical advice, isn't it? So the very basic things: open the windows to improve ventilation. That's one thing. So I hope that's obvious. Now, some people, of course, actually find that their symptoms get eased anyway if they move from, say, a central building, seated area to being by the window anyway, even if they can't open the window. That can in itself help. So that's one thing. NHS continues with: set the temperature, if you can control the temperature, at about 18 degrees. Don't change it lots of times during the day. Well, that's all very basic stuff. Try to reduce stress. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I'm not trying to be facetious, but this is the problem with sick building syndrome, is that actually nobody really knows. And so until you get into the subtle energies and start to examine on a very subtle level what might be affecting the individual, then you're not really going to start to sort of walk down a course that could help ease that person's issue, unless they obviously have an allergy to something or reacting directly to some physical thing within their environment. I mean, stress is such a major trigger for so many things. The other thing that the NHS says is take regular screen breaks. Well, yeah, okay, that's fine. And go outside for some fresh air during lunchtime and other breaks. Well, and again, those are the very basics, which is just like common sense. Just get out of there, basically, and reduce your stress levels. The Lancet, actually, the medical journal over here, well, it'll be worldwide now, isn't it, published on the web. But interestingly, what it says about sick building syndrome is that it's an increasingly common problem. Well, that might have something to do with modern stress, maybe. although it doesn't say that, but it says an increasingly common problem. Although objective physiological abnormalities are not generally found and permanent sequelae are rare, in other words, if somebody's been ill from something, it doesn't mean that they're then going to suffer from sick building syndrome. That's what they're saying there. It's rare. The symptoms of SBS can be uncomfortable, disabling, and the whole workplace can actually be rendered non-functional. And that's the big issue. Physical examination, so specific building related illnesses suggest by history or physical examination should be ruled out. On-site assessment of buildings is extremely useful. Treatment involves both the patient and the building. That's the point I was trying to get to. Treatment involves both the patient and the building. It's not just a question of looking at the building and saying, well, what's going on there? It's not just a question of looking at the patient. What's the interaction? Which of course is the basis of everything. When we come back to saying, well, it's psychological as an issue.
On that too, I'm just thinking that the work from home movement has really kind of exploded since the early part of this millennia, and it's been compounded more so by the pandemic. So I guess more people are going to be working from home, and this applies not just to what you're talking about. I'm assuming doesn't just apply to people working in a building such as an office, but perhaps a home office as well, or a home, spending more time at home.
Interestingly, actually, sick building syndrome as a syndrome does actually apply far more to corporate type offices or office buildings rather than home.
Yeah.
I guess partly because, so if somebody is working from home, let's say they've pulled in, they've got a separate room that they're now using as an office, and they've pulled in their work computer and got a nice big monitor there, and they then find that when they go into that room, they start to feel nauseous or they get headaches. Well, the chances are that that's going to be because of the IT that they brought in is going to be something to do with the screen or something to do with the laptop.
Yeah.
Because they're working at home, which is where they've been living for some years. If they haven't felt dreadful prior to setting up the working space, then it's something to do with setting up the working space. So sick building syndrome per se usually applies to larger corporate sort of buildings, rather than not necessarily the big stuff, but it can be a small company of 20 people or so. They can all be suffering from sick building syndrome. It depends what it is. It's such a wide area of nebulous sort of concern.
Yeah, Tim, I always like to take information that we've heard and make it into something that's really practical that people could take away and try. As a little challenge, what would you leave people with from this discussion?
I've had real trouble with this one, actually, trying to think about how we relate a challenge to sick building syndrome. And actually, funny enough, the only thing that I've come up with, see if you think this is suitable or not, is related to that last point that you made. And it's really about whether viewers or yourself, let's ask you, do you know anybody that actually is one of those people that is constantly moving their furniture around in their house? Do you know the sort of person I mean? I've come across several of them in my life. I used to be one in a previous house. Is that every few months it was like, no, I want to move the dining table over there. We want to put that over there. Yeah. That's better. And then you look at it for about a week's time and think, oh God, no, that doesn't feel right. And it's just about that feeling. Do I feel right, whatever that means, in my space? So I suppose my challenge is either think about that question, do I feel right in my space, whether that be because you're working at home or wherever you're working these days? Or do you know somebody, have you ever met somebody that is constantly moving their furniture around in their home? Because then I would want them, the challenge is ask them, why do they do it? Why do you do that? Your wife says you move the furniture around all the time. You're getting fed up with it. Why is it you move the furniture? Because fundamentally, I just wanted to really sort of think about that relationship between the building and the person that's in it.
Yeah, great to make it practical by just giving us some nice little thought we can take away there. So thank you for that. Each week, I ask our experts to leave us with a challenge. It's just an idea. It's something that we could try. If we enjoy it, we can stick with it. If it doesn't work for us, we can throw it out and just keep looking for something else that can work. I'm going to be taking this week's challenge. You can see my findings from this challenge in our challenge roundup video, which is a monthly summary covering all of the challenges our experts have shared. To get that video and all of our latest health and wellness uploads, including interviews and reviews, subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified whenever we post. And if this channel can help your friends and family, please share it with them too. If you want to get proactive with your health, Total Wellness Club are developing health quests over at questly.life. Join while we're developing the site and get access to health quests that immediately personalise your health. You'll get to identify which of 10 critical health categories need your attention. You'll be able to track your progress and you'll be able to help us develop the platform too. I'll put a link in the description and I'll see you in the next video.